Are your control arms leaking this nasty fluid like this one? Well, my name's Cole from FCP Euro, and today we're going to show you how to replace the upper and lower control arms in your BMW G05 X5. On the table in front of us, we have the Mila HD lower control arm kit for the G05 X5 and the Lemfiter upper control arm kit. Both of these kits are going to include all the hardware that you're going to need for this DIY. So the lower control arm kit uses Mila's HD control arms. Now, what makes them so special and why do they call them HD? Well, they use heavy-duty control arm bushings, a steel construction compared to the stock aluminum, and their ball joints are upgraded as well. At FCPEuro.com, we offer a variety of different control arms for this vehicle, including all genuine parts. Now, how do we know if our control arms need to be replaced? Well, they can squeak, they can bind, they can cause cracks, they can have tears in the bushings, and all of that can cause the vehicle not to handle that great. As far as service intervals go, BMW does not have a set one. However, here at FCP Euro, we recommend inspecting or replacing your control arms every 50 to 90,000 miles. Now, that recommended service interval is totally dependent on road conditions and driving habits. Now that we know what we're installing today, let's go over all the tools we're going to need to get this job done. We're going to need an arrangement of different sockets in different lengths, including a 24mm, 21mm, 18mm, 17mm, 16mm, 13mm, 10mm, and 8mm. We'll need a couple specialty sockets, including a 17mm Allen, T55 Torx, T47 Torx, T50 Torx, E20 socket, E12 socket, E10 socket, and a long T45. Some extensions at different lengths, some ratchets in different lengths and sizes, a pry bar, a 90-degree hose pick, a couple different wrenches, including 24mm, 18mm, 16mm, 13mm, and 10mm. We'll need a flathead screwdriver, a small 90-degree pick, a tape measure, a variety of torque wrenches ranging from torque spec of 5 Newton meters all the way up to 210 Newton meters, and a 5mm Allen for our pass-through socket. And some optional tools that will definitely make the job easier include a trim panel popper, some glass cleaner, a ratchet rope, a lot of power tools. Now that we know all the tools that we're going to need, let's go and start our DIY. If your X5 is equipped with air suspension, we're going to have to deactivate it before lifting the vehicle. To do that, we're going to press the start-stop button 3 times, let the ignition go through its cycles, and then we're going to hold this air suspension switch down for 7 seconds and then release. Once the air suspension is deactivated, you'll see the light goes away, and that indicates that we can now lift the vehicle. So if you're not going to be replacing your upper control arms, you can skip ahead in the video. However, we are on this X5, so we're going to meet you in the trunk. Since we're going to be replacing the upper control arms on this vehicle, we'll have to deactivate the battery located in the trunk. We're just going to open this awesome split tailgate and pop this cover up in the trunk. With a flathead screwdriver, we're going to have to come in and remove all of these clips that hold in this plastic cover. There's going to be 7 of them. Now, with all the clips removed, we can lift this up and set it to the side. With a 10mm socket and a ratchet, we can loosen this nut on the negative ground strap, remove it, and put it to the side. And now transition to lifting the vehicle and starting to remove the wheel. To take this wheel off, we're going to need a 17mm socket, and we're going to be using an impact gun. If you don't have an impact gun, you're going to want to break these lug bolts off down on the ground. One thing that is optional but very handy is these little wheel hangers, and you just thread that in, and what that does is allow you to pull the wheel off without it falling. We're going to want to remove this axle bolt here, and we're going to use a 17mm Allen socket with a large ratchet and a flathead screwdriver to counterhold the rotor in the vanes. Now that that's broken loose, we can remove it with our drill. Now you may see a little bit of oil coming out here, and that's completely normal. That is part of the grease from the axle. Now we're going to raise the vehicle and start removing the belly pan. Now to remove this front belly pan, we're gonna have to take a 8mm socket and remove the 16 screws holding it on. With this last screw here, we're gonna wanna counter hold this belly pan, remove the screw, gently lower it, and then pull it out. Now we're going to remove this plastic panel here with 3 screws underneath and then 3 screws in the fender liner area. Now we can pull this panel down and pull it out. With an 18mm socket, we're going to remove these 4 bolts holding this crash brace on. With that brace removed, we're going to start removing this control arm. To remove this nut, we're going to need a 24mm socket and a T50 socket. We're going to break it free with an impact or a ratchet. And once that is broken free, we're going to use that T50 socket to put on the inside and then counter hold it with a 24mm open end wrench. Just thread the rest of it off by hand. With this control arm now loose in the knuckle, we can take this axle, pull it out of the spline, and push it back a little bit. Now with an E20 socket and a ratchet, we can come over to this bolt here and break it free and take it out. This does have a special nut on the back that doesn't require you to counter hold it with a wrench, so it makes it a little bit easier to take out. We're going to use a little pry bar to get behind this bolt to push it forward a little bit, and then we can wiggle it out. With all the hardware out, we can start removing the tension strut. With a pry bar, we're going to gently press down on this and then put it to the side and grab the ball joint and the axle and shimmy out this control arm. Look at that. Now with this tension strut removed, I wanted to show you real quick what failed. As you can see, there is a nice tear here in the bushing and it is pouring out hydraulic fluid. It's definitely time to replace this. Now we have our new Mila HD control arm, and before we install this into the vehicle, it's definitely helpful if you take the ball joint and position it downward like this. Once it's positioned, we're going to remove the nut and fish it into the knuckle. There we go. One thing that's useful, before we tighten this down all the way, we're just going to thread it on a couple threads so this control arm doesn't fall out. With the new hardware provided in the kit, we're going to slide this control arm back up into its hole and then insert our new bolt. Sometimes a pry bar is helpful here to get this bushing into its spot. Now a little pro tip here, you can use a flathead screwdriver that fits inside this hole to actually move this bushing into alignment place. There we go. Now with that bolt provided in the kit, we're just going to thread it on a little bit and tighten it to the point where it's not snug, but still allow that bushing to move. Now, this bolt coming out was an E20 size socket. However, the hardware in the kit, we use a 21mm socket to tighten this. Since all of these bushings need to be tightened at ride height, we're just gonna snug it up for now. Now, we're gonna wanna come back and tighten this nut on the ball joint. And to do that, we're gonna use a pass-through socket set. This one in particular is made by CTA, but there's many brands out there. We're gonna need a 24mm socket and then a 5mm Allen key. Threading that in here, we're just gonna continue to tighten this. Now we're just gonna snug this up here. With our torque wrench set to 100 Newton meters with a 24mm socket, we're gonna tighten the nut and then rotate it an additional 90 degrees. Now, if your torque wrench does not have an angle function on it, we can use a good old Sharpie. By taking our Sharpie here, we're gonna mark one section of the nut, and then approximately 90 degrees after, we're going to mark the knuckle. With a long ratchet, we're gonna get on that nut here and rotate this an additional 90 degrees. With this control arm now in, we're going to take this hub and spin it the complete opposite way so we can start removing this control arm. Now to access the bolt here, we're gonna have to remove the cover and remove it with an 8mm socket, and we're going to remove these 5 bolts. This cover fishes right out over the axle. Using a 21mm socket and a ratchet on the nut side, and then a 18mm wrench to counter hold the bolt, we're going to remove this lower bolt that holds on the strut to the control arm. Now we rotated the hub so the bolt will slide past the control arm and we can take it out. With a 24mm socket, we're gonna break this nut loose. And then using a T50 Torx socket to counterhold it, we will remove the nut completely. Now using two 21mm sockets and ratchets, we're gonna remove this bolt. It may make it a little bit easier to push this hub straight so we can move this control arm and push that bolt out. Using a pry bar to aid removal, we can now lower this side of the bushing out of the car and then lift up and pull the whole control arm out. Now with this control arm removed, we're going to bring over our Mila HD control arm and transfer over this weight to the new arm. One thing to mention here, these control arms are size specific and they're stamped with an L or an R on this control arm. So we're going to transfer this weight over by using two 18mm either sockets or wrenches, and we're just going to remove it like that and then take this weight off and remove the bolt. With the new hardware included in the kit, we're going to want to make sure the orientation of this weight is the same as we took it off. So we're going to slide it onto the control arm and then take our nut here and just snug it up because we'll do the final tightening in the car. We also want to make sure that this weight is in line with the control arm. Now with our assembled control arm, we're going to remove this nut and fish it into the hub. We're going to thread this on just to keep this control arm on the hub, and we'll come back to tighten this. Now we're going to position this control arm in the spot here. We may have to push the hub back a little bit to get over the subframe, and then we can slide it in place. Now that our hole is aligned, we're going to take our new bolt provided in the kit and install it into the vehicle. Take the nut and thread it onto the back side of it, and just like the front control arm here, we're going to tighten these bolts at ride height. Using a 24mm through socket and a T45 long socket with a ratchet to counterhold, we're gonna snug up this nut here and then tighten it to specification. We're gonna tighten this nut to the same specification as the other lower ball joint. Now we can rotate this hub to be centered. With an 18mm socket and our torque wrench set to 108 Newton meters and counterholding with another 18-inch wrench, we can now tighten this damper in its final space. At this point, if you're just replacing your lower control arms, you can reinstall this bolt and continue on. However, we're going to be replacing the upper control arms, so we're going to be coming back to this bolt. Now with the 16mm socket, we're going to remove this pinch bolt and then spread it so we can pull it out of the car. To continue to disassemble for the upper control arm replacement, we're going to use a 10mm wrench and crack this airline fitting loose on the strut. We're going to want to just get it to the point where air is slowly bleeding out of it, and then once all of the air is bled out of this fitting, we'll remove it completely. With all of the air done hissing out, we can continue to remove this nut completely and pull it out of all the clips on the strut. Just tuck that away nicely so it doesn't get snagged. Come over to this wiring grommet and pull it out of the strut, and then we're gonna remove this connector. If it gives you a little hard time removing it, you can always take a 90-degree pick, come underneath of it, and pry that locking tab up a little bit so we can pull it off. Now we'll just work our way disconnecting everything from the knuckle, including pushing these grommets of the brake line out. Now we'll pull all these wiring grommets out of their holders on this metal bracket and then this plastic bracket on the strut. Now we're going to lower the car and continue working in the engine bay. Back in the engine bay, we're going to start removing these two cross braces to access a bunch of bolts. Using a 16mm socket, we're going to come over and remove all of these bolts. We can now remove this cross brace and then come back and remove this bolt right here to remove this cross brace. With an E12 socket, we can remove this last bolt. With that same E12 socket, we can remove these three top bolts for the strut. Now on the last bolt, we're going to want to make sure that we counterhold the strut so we do not drop it. Next, we're going to take a jack and support the hub. With a 16mm socket and a wrench to counterhold, we're going to remove this upper pinch bolt. Now, with the knuckle separated from this upper control arm, we're going to take our jack here and lower this assembly slightly, just enough to give us a little bit more room. With the knuckle now lowered a little bit, we can push it to the side and remove this strut. As you can see here, we found that our headlight level sensor is broken and disconnected. So if you want to see another DIY on that, let us know in the comments section below. Now we're going to pull this arm down and take a 10mm socket with a ratchet and remove this top nut that holds on that level sensor bracket. With a T55 socket and a ratchet, we're going to remove the bolt that faces the driver. To remove this bolt, we're going to head back into the engine bay to remove a couple more things. To access the nut on this one bolt, we're going to have to remove the ECM. And to do that, we're going to pull this little plastic cover off. Now to remove the ECU, we're going to have to come here with a pick and pop this little tab towards the cover so we can pull up and then remove it. Next, take that same pick or depress this little tab and start releasing these connectors and pulling them all off of the ECM. Now looking down, you'll see there's two release clips that we're going to want to push, and then we can slide this ECM out. Now with the ECM removed, you can see this 16mm nut, and we're going to want to counter hold that so we can remove this bolt from the control arm. I don't know why BMW didn't put a captive nut here, but it's okay. While counter holding, we can now take our T55 socket and ratchet and remove this bolt. Now, before we install our new wishbone, we're going to have to remove this panel here, move back the felt, and replace the captive nut that is on the body. Coming down here, we're going to take a trim panel popper tool, get right behind this little plastic holder and pop it out. Make sure you don't lose this little clip. Now we can push back this felt and access our captive nut right here. Slide my finger down and we can just pull that up. Now with our new nut included in the kit, we're going to just slide this down into that groove. Now we can take this little plastic rivet and put it back in. With that new captive nut in place, we can reinstall this cover, lock it in place, and reinstall the hood seal. Be sure to get this groove right over this section of the cowl, and it clips in nicely. Now, with our new captive nut installed on the back side, we can take this new wishbone, slide it in, and install this back bolt. With our T55 socket, we're just going to want to snug this bolt up. Don't go too tight because we do have to set the position on this control arm. Now with the other bolt, we can slide this into its home, go back into the engine bay, and install the nut. Since we cannot torque this control arm in its resting position at ride height with the strut in, BMW gives us some nice measurements for us to set the position of this control arm. Place this tape measure all the way up against the body, and then set the bottom of this metal arm right at 160mm. Now we can come in with our torque wrench and tighten this bolt to 38Nm. Once the initial torque is done, we will take a Sharpie, mark the bolt, mark the body, and rotate this bolt an additional 90 degrees. Now we can repeat that process on the other side while counter holding the nut in the engine bay. After that bolt is tightened, we're going to come over here to the headlight level sensor, remove the nut here, and reinstall it into the control arm. So we're just going to fish that through, make sure that locking tab is in its hole, and then come over top and thread on the nut. Now that that nut is threaded on, we can come back with our torque wrench set to 8Nm and do the final tightening. Now that we have our control arm all in and tightened to spec, we're going to take our strut here and reinstall it into the vehicle. we're going to want to go around all this wiring here, snake it under the axle, and we're going to want to make sure that we can slide it right over the control arm. There we go. Now we can start to position it backwards underneath this control arm. You might have to adjust the height a little bit. We can just push this control arm up. There we go. Now, a little trick while this is in place is to take the lower shock bolt, feed it through that lower pivot point so we can take our jack and jack this up a little bit so we can then thread in our top strut bolts. You may have to wiggle that hub around to get that bolt in there. Now we can take our jack and slowly lift this hub up into its spot so we can thread in those bolts. All right, there we go. With the new hardware provided in the kit, we're going to thread these in and then tighten them down to 28 Newton meters. Continuing with reassembly, we can now take our engine control module and slide it into the bracket and clip it into place. Now, taking our electrical connectors for this engine control module, we're going to start with the one that's connected over here towards the body side. And we're going to slide this over the pins with the lever out, push it down a little bit. You'll see that lever starts to move back. And then once it's down in this position, we'll clip it in. So we're going to start with the black with the white label housing right here. And then we're going to continue with the gray marked connector and do the same and start walking our way down all the connectors. Next, we'll do the blue connector housing, press that down. Then we'll go over to the green connector housing, press that down. Then we'll go to yellow, and then we'll finish with the white. We're just going to want to make sure that all of these connectors are clipped in properly because this does control the engine control module, and if they're not installed correctly, we may have some fault codes. Now we'll take this little plastic piece and you'll see that it has two little tabs that need to be slid into this bracket right here first. So we're going to slide that down, install it on this side first, and then clip it in. Now we can just pop this beauty cover right back on. With the new hardware provided in the kit, we're going to reinstall our strut braces here. Taking the bolt, we're going to thread it into this back firewall connection because it'll make it a little bit easier to install. Just going to a couple threads here just to get it started. There we go. Now you'll see that there's an end here with a slot for it, and we're going to just slide that into position over that bolt. There we go. Now we can start threading in the bolt over here. With our second cross brace with the bend that faces downward, we're going to position that towards the front of the vehicle, and then thread in the bolt on the strut tower. Reusing the bolt we removed, we're going to thread that into the front cross brace here, and then tighten all these bolts down to specification. With our torque wrench, we're going to tighten these three bolts to 56 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. Once these three bolts are tightened, we can come back with our E12 socket and tighten this bolt down to 28 Newton meters. With everything up top here on the engine bay taken care of and the upper part of the wishbone assembly done, before heading down back into the wheel well to reassemble, we're going to show you one key difference over on the passenger side to access the nut to replace on the firewall. Now on the passenger side, to replace the nut that is on the vehicle on the side of the strut tower, we're going to have to remove this auxiliary battery. And to do that, we're going to start with the negative battery terminal, which you're going to need a 13mm socket and a small ratchet to remove this nut and set the cable to the side. This nut stays on the actual cable itself and will not come off because it's captive, so no need to drop that. We're just going to tuck this down here out of the way. There we go. With the flathead screwdriver, we're going to get underneath this cover and pry it off. Taking that same 13mm socket and ratchet, we're going to remove the positive cable lead. We're going to take this and tuck it over to the side. Now this 13mm nut is a little tight back there, so a open end wrench, or in this case we're going to use a ratcheting box end wrench, we can remove this nut so we can pull this little holder off and remove the battery. You might need to slide this forward a little bit to clear the cowl, and now we can pull that all the way out. One last thing before we can remove this battery, we're going to have to remove this electrical connector here. It does have a safety lock, so we're going to push that safety lock back, press down, and then we can slide that connector off. Before we go ahead and remove this auxiliary battery, we're going to pop this cowl partially out of the windshield to give us a little bit more height so we can then pull the battery out. To do that, we're going to get underneath here and gently pull upwards. Just like that. Be very careful. We don't want to damage the glass. And now we can pop this little handle up and slide this battery out. To pull this box out that holds the battery, we're going to have to remove the hardware that's holding it down. We're using a E10 socket on a long extension. The first bolt here is over in the corner, so we're going to get on that right there, grab our ratchet, and then remove it. And then the other bolt is going to be over here in the corner. With those two bolts removed, there's one more nut that we have to take off for this tray to come out, and that's underneath the fender liner down below. With an 8mm socket and a ratchet, we're going to zip off these screws to pull this back side of the fender liner out. Be careful with this trim here. It is painted. We can stretch it a little bit, but we don't want to go too crazy. And then 4 more screws down here at the bottom. We can now slide this fender liner out a little bit and then pull it away from the vehicle. And this nut right here is the one that we're going to have to remove that auxiliary bracket. With that nut now off, we can take our little pry tool, pop this wire holder off, and remove this box that holds down the battery. With this battery tray now removed, we can continue our DIY. Now we can move this wiring harness over a little bit to pull it out of the firewall. Just give it a little bit of shake. There is a holder on it that is a clip in, and if it's giving you some problems, we can take a trim panel popper tool off, push it to the side, and then our captive nut is going to be underneath this insulation here. So we're going to pop that little pin out. Now we can pull this back and access that nut. Again, this is that upper wishbone nut that we're going to have to replace on the passenger side. So we're showing you this process because we do have to remove the auxiliary battery. Now, after you installed your new wishbone, we're going to have to reinstall this auxiliary battery. And to do that, we're going to start by lowering this battery tray down into the spot. So once this is lowered into place, we're going to have to reinstall the 2 bolts and the 1 nut from underneath. All of these fasteners are going to be torqued to 10 Newton meters. Lifting up here on the cowl, we can now slide our auxiliary battery back into place. We're going to take our hold down here and fish it through this little spot and lay it down. And now we can thread this nut on and tighten it to 15 Newton meters. Now, taking our battery lead here, we're going to thread these nuts on and tighten them to 19 Newton meters. We can now take this electrical connector, plug it back in, and then reassemble the cover. Make sure you push this lock down. A little bit of glass cleaner here will help this cowl slide back into place. Now, with this cover all reinstalled, let's go down back to the driver's side and continue this DIY. Coming into the wheel well, we're going to jack this knuckle up a little bit to give us a little bit more room to get closer to this actual ball joint. And we're going to slide this into the hub here. While you wiggle the knuckle, press down on the upper control arm and help it fully get into place. Now the direction of this bolt is going to be from the rearward coming forward, and you may have to just push this ball joint up and down a little bit to get it all the way in. Now with our nut, we're going to reinstall this and tighten this to 56 Newton meters. Now we're going to continue with reassembling all of the wires in the wheel well. Take this connector here and plug it back into the strut. Make sure you hear that audible click and that connector is not going anywhere. Now we can start putting all of the rubber grommets for the brake lines back into their holders. Now, if these are a little tricky to get in, a little bit of glass cleaner on the rubber will make it a breeze. So a little glass cleaner friend over here. We're just gonna pop these in, and then we're gonna work our way down here to this plastic bracket on the strut and plop these into place. Windex fixes everything. Let's see if our followers can remember what that quote is from. One more over here. Lovely. Next, we're gonna take our airline here and route it back up into its spot. This is going into a plastic fitting, so be very cautious when tightening this. We just want to snug it up, not go too crazy tight, or else we'll strip the plastic. With our 10mm open end wrench, we can just come and snug up this airline. Again, be very, very gentle. This is plastic. Now you'll see this is resting almost in its natural position, but we are going to have to clip this back in to the airline holder. Taking the new axle bolt that's provided in the kit, we're going to thread it into our axle here and then come back and do the final tightening on this later. One thing that we have to make sure is that the splines on the axle itself are lined up to the hub and they're not misaligned. Again, we're just snugging this up here. We're not torquing this bolt down because we're going to come back to that later. Before we go and reinstall the wheels, we're just going to take the nut here and thread it onto this bolt, and we're going to tighten this at ride height. All right, so we're at the point where we need to do the final tightening on all of the lower control arms, and to do that, we're gonna have to get the vehicle at ride height. Now, there is a way to do this without actually putting the car on the ground, and that's actually jacking up this whole knuckle assembly to that 160 Newton meters from the body to that lower control arm that we stated previously in the video. So in this case, we have a pull jack here. If you have a jack at home that you can get underneath the car, that will do the same. So we're just gonna get underneath of here, position this pull jack in a spot where it's not gonna mess anything up. And now we're gonna move this hub upwards and then go back up top and use our tape measure to measure that distance. Looks like we gotta go a little bit more. All right, we wanna make sure that it's all the way on the body, and the measurement that we're looking for is the bottom of this control arm is at 160 millimeters. So we need to go up a little bit. Keep going. I think that's good right there. Now that our ride height is set, we're gonna go underneath the car and start tightening all of our control arms. Now on this front lower control arm here, it actually has a captive nut on the backside, so we don't need to counter hold it. So we're gonna come with our torque wrench here set to 165 Newton meters, do our initial torque here, and then come back and rotate this bolt 90 degrees. Now coming over to our next bolt, we can tighten this inner lower control arm bolt to 165 Newton meters using two 21 millimeter sockets, and then we will come back with an additional 90 degrees. Now we're gonna do that same exact torquing procedure on this bolt using a 18 millimeter wrench on this side and a 21 millimeter socket on the other. With all of the control arms now tightened at ride height, you can repeat this process on the passenger side. Now with our brace here, we're gonna slide it into that hole and slide it up into the vehicle. With our new bolts in the kit, we're gonna thread these all in and then tighten them to 68 Newton meters. And with that, we're gonna repeat the same process on the passenger side, but now let's put the belly pan back on. With our cover that covers the axle part of this vehicle, we're going to slide this over the axle and reinstall the 5 8mm screws. 2 screws are going to be located in the fender well, and then the 3 other are going to be underneath. These are going to be plastic. Using a 8mm socket, just snug these up. Taking this front cover here, we're going to slide it into place, and we're only going to install 6 of these M8 screws because the last 3 over here we're going to install when we put the belly pan on. Now we're going to start by installing 3 of the screws in the wheel well here and then transition underneath. Now install the 3 screws on the front here. With our belly pan, we can now slide this in and install the remaining screws. Now let's reinstall the wheels and torque the axle bolts on the ground. Now, one thing we need to do before reinstalling the wheel is pop out the center cap because we are going to be tightening this axle bolt through that spot. We'll just thread these in by hand to make sure we do not cross thread them. And then once this is on the ground, we are going to tighten these lug bolts to 140 Newton meters. With our 17mm socket and an extension, we can now insert this into the bolt, and we will tighten this down to initially 210 Newton meters and then an additional 90 degrees. Since we don't have any way that we can paint the vehicle, you can if you want to use some painter's tape, but I'm going to use the end of my ratchet to dictate my angle. Here, we're at the 12 o'clock position, and we're going to rotate the ratchet all the way down to the 3 o'clock position. Now, you're going to want to do that same torquing procedure on the other side, and then after that, we can reinstall our center cap. Now, with this taken care of, let's go back to the trunk and reconnect the battery. We can now reconnect our negative battery lead and tighten this nut to 5 Newton meters. Once we're done with that, we can reinstall all the trim panels using the plastic rivets and then close the trunk. And now with the battery reconnected, we can head inside the cabin to reactivate the air suspension and complete this DIY. Now that we installed our control arms, we can reactivate the air suspension and go on our way. So we're going to turn the ignition on by pressing this button 3 times. Once the ignition's on, we're just going to want to hold this switch down for 7 seconds again and then release. Now, if you can hear in the background, once this air suspension is activated again, the vehicle is going to self-level itself. Don't worry, it's totally normal. Now that our air suspension is deactivated, we have concluded this DIY. If you like what you saw in this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, drop them in the comment section below. And if you want to see more videos like this G05 X5 DIY, hit that subscribe button because we have a lot more coming. My name's Cole from FCP Euro. Thanks for watching and keep on wrenching.